I wanted to, Michael, to hear from you on Tulsi Gabbard, who's been nominated for DNI. This seems to be the one. Actually, she and Hegseth are the two that the like America Firsters, I feel like, are consoling themselves with after being a little disappointed about like Marco Rubio. Again, I don't know why they were surprised, but whatever. Put that aside. She has so changed her views, though, in just like, you know, a very short period of time without any explanation, that it's very hard for me to feel any sense of confidence that she'll actually be the adversary to the deep state that she is advertised as.
Yeah, I'm going to write my next article on this after I did my my Hegseth thing yesterday. It's kind of a long time coming. You know, I'll admit that I bit my tongue on Tulsi Gabbard for a while because, unusual for virtually any politician, I was inclined to like give her the benefit of the doubt. Now, maybe that's a flaw on my part, and I'll admit that. Just because, you know, I covered her, I would say, more closely. And not that I would say, it's just true, factually true, that I covered her more closely than any journalist in the country in her 2020 campaign. I remember being on your old show on the Hill talking about her.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was kind of like one of the few people who like took her seriously and wanted to explicate her beliefs on things and her political programs, such as it existed, because it was very kind of malevolently or maliciously covered in much of the media, and they're reprising some of that now by just saying that like she's a stooge of Assad, which I think is just as ridiculous today as it was in 2019. But you know, in the intervening period, she clearly decided that what she would do is just become a Republican operative. So, I mean, the Fox News thing applies to Tulsi Gabbard as well. People think that maybe Trump picked her because, like, he thinks that she's going to be like the true America First proponent within the administration or something. Well, it could also be just that for the past 2+ years, she decided to become a paid Fox News contributor and appear constantly on Fox. And Trump saw her and thinks that she's good on TV. I mean, that seems like a lot of what's driving Trump's decision making. And yeah, I mean, she has just so radically abandoned so many of the core convictions that she espoused in the 2020 Democratic primary campaign, which I thought in a lot of ways were very prescient. Like talking about the new Cold War with Russia and China, that came to a head within, you know, a year or two after she made it the centerpiece of her campaign in terms of the Ukraine stuff. China stuff very much heated up after that with relation to Taiwan and so forth. But it's very difficult for me to draw any consistent through line between her platform and her political activity in 2019, 2020 with what she's doing right now. Like when she left Congress, she didn't have like as I understand it, a fully formed plan as to what she was going to do. She was still very young. She was still like active in the National Guard and so forth, and didn't have necessarily a well-defined political path for her to take. And she had been maligned pretty incessantly by the Democrats. So she did this whole thing where she says, you know, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me, which is like the most common trite refrain that so many figures have done over the course of decades. I mean, Ronald Reagan did it. So like, if you think that you're like, doing something innovative, I don't know why, or why it should be seen as impressive. But in the 2022 midterms, okay, around the time when she first became a paid Fox News contributor, what she decided to do was go around just endorsing random Republican candidates for the House and Senate. Like she endorsed Chuck Grassley. She endorsed Herschel Walker.
Oh, boy.
She endorsed...
And she endorsed Carrie Lake.
She endorsed Carrie Lake, that's right. Yeah, she endorsed this guy, Don Bolduc, if you remember him in New Hampshire, who ran for Senate and was basically just a deranged sort of maniac.
Total lunatic.
And so, like, if you want to try to tell me that the views that she espoused in the 2020 primary campaign are somehow compatible with the views espoused by Chuck Grassley, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, other than Tulsi Gabbard simply wanted to insinuate herself into the Republican power structure.
Yeah.
Show that she had some influence within Republican politics, and then ascend through the ranks with the hopes of eventually getting appointed to some Trump administration position. And sure enough, it worked.
It worked.
Teamed up with RFK Jr. over the course of this campaign to basically spew a lot of bullshit about Trump's foreign policy program. Like she rehearsed this whole line about how, oh, what happened in Trump's first term was that he got hoodwinked by all these mean and wily swamp creatures who convinced him to do bad stuff. And this time's going to be way different. Well, Trump has maximum political flexibility right now, more than he'll ever have in his career, most likely. Unless something like 9/11 happens, God forbid, in his next term, and like his approval rating go up to 90% or something, like happened under Bush. But like, as of now, he has the most political latitude that he's ever had because he won the popular vote, he won all those swing states. The Republicans are going to control every branch, so he can appoint whoever he wants without the swamp, quote unquote, trying to like nefariously intervene and like get him to do their bidding. If what he is like trying to defy the so-called swamp. Well, I mean, look at who he appointed National Security Advisor. That's not even a Senate-confirmed position. So he can appoint basically anyone. And he appointed Mike Waltz, who I've interviewed now for several years, and he's very clear that he's one of the most hardcore interventionist members of the entire Republican conference on every issue. I mean, There's no really question about it, and that's who Trump decided to pick. So, but Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., they went through this whole like rigmarole. They were saying, "Oh, like here's what's going to be different now. Trump is going to be able to transcend the swamp or defeat the deep state or purge the neocons." I mean, RFK Jr. I mean, we shouldn't get down this rabbit hole because it drives me even more crazy. Like when he went out and endorsed, because like alternative media was so in the tank for RFK Jr. and his gobbledygook.
Trust me, Michael.
And then which
I'm
then
well
got
aware.
funneled into Trump on totally spurious grounds. That it still is crazy to me. But when RFK Jr. came out and endorsed Trump in August, one of his reasons, he said, was that both he and Trump agreed that together they were going to expel all the, quote, neocons from the foreign policy apparatus. And then Trump does this little pump fake where he posts on Truth Social not long after the election, "I hereby declare that although I appreciate their service, I will not be asking Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo to join the next administration." Everybody thought, oh, wow, Trump really is pushing the neocons. And then he picked two people for those same roles that Haley and Pompeo previously occupied that are substantively interchangeable with Haley and Pompeo. Stefanik for UN and ambassador, and Rubio for Secretary of State.
Yep.
So Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. are really to blame or culpable for assisting in this propagandistic duplicity that led people to be shocked that this could be an eventuality for a second Trump administration when it was extremely foreseeable. But I talked to voters who cited the endorsement of Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. to me, who were maybe like more hazily ideological, maybe had a libertarian leaning, maybe even like a vaguely leftish type leaning where they thought that they were against the establishment and maybe Trump was better suited to oppose the so-called establishment than Kamala Harris because she's the incumbent or she's associated with Biden or whatever the reasoning is. Those endorsements actually added some value to Trump's campaign.
I think RFK Jr.
and it was on totally false pretenses.
Was extremely important because remember, I mean, he was still in the race and he was taking way more votes from Trump than he was.
What did he have when he dropped out? Like 5% or something?
Something like that. Yeah,
it was that much.
Yeah,
it was as high as 17%.
Yeah,
I mean, by the time he dropped, it was significantly lower, but it was still, he was going to pick up a few percentage points, especially in an election like this where people are just purely like, there's a lot of rage and a lot of disgust with the establishment. And it's not like the country fell in love with Donald Trump. So I actually think his endorsement, without that, it could have completely flipped this election result. So yeah, it was consequential. And then, not to go down this rabbit hole, but also obviously RFK Jr. has been put in at HHS and he's on his whole MAHA arc and talking about getting the toxins on the food. Okay, great. And where you really need to be to get that done, or at least have any shot at getting that done, is ag secretary. And lo and behold, who does Trump put in an ag secretary? This like DC corporate lobbyist type who was going to be totally friendly to big ag. And do you hear a word? Do you hear a peep For many
they're
of the
not
Maha
saying
people,
anything.
let alone RFK Jr., not a fucking
But
word.
to be fair, I don't know who would be worse in that scenario, the corporate lobbyist or RFK. And the reason I say that is because RFK has a lot of ideas that I just think are factually wrong,
I mean,
like his obsession with raw milk, which gets people sick. Now you got bird flu going around there. The pasteurization is actually super important for the milk. It's like super important. It's not really debatable.
I personally
the
like
anti-vax
living
stuff.
in a society where we don't have massive measles outbreaks.
Well, yeah, that's like the anti-vax stuff is genuinely scary to me. Vaccines work. I've seen enough evidence to conclude that, and it's so I genuinely don't know. I mean, I think both are bad if you were to have RFK with that power or the corporate lobbyist with that power, but I genuinely don't know which one would actually be better for that position.
You know, in May, RFK Jr. put out a screed, you would have to call it, denouncing Trump. It was, he hadn't really done that up until that point in the campaign, but he finally was kind of, I guess, browbeaten into doing it because Trump was attacking him. And he said that, one of his critiques of Trump was that he stuffed his first administration with corporate lobbyists, which was absolutely true.
True.
And at the end of the screed, Trump, RFK Jr. said, if you think that a second term would be any different, you're engaging in wishful thinking. And then, lo and behold, RFK Jr. himself becomes the quote-unquote wishful thinker. And have you taken a look at who's been appointed? Like, aside from RFK Jr. himself, who is not a lobbyist, Pam Bondi, now the incoming Attorney General, is a literal D.C. corporate lobbyist. And, oh, by the way, she is a lobbyist with the same firm at which Susie Wiles, who's the chief of staff, worked on behalf of, giant corporate interests.
Pharma and all kinds of other corporate interests
right.
that RFK
So
Jr.
there
would
might be,
purport
like,
to
slightly
be adversarial
relatively-
towards.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a slight relative diminishment in corporate lobbyists in this administration
More
compared
billionaires,
to the
though.
first one. But, like, if the Attorney General, but if, like, the Attorney General is a corporate lobbyist, I mean, that's kind of flies in the face of that assurance that RFK Jr. gave that, like, there would be this giant epiphany now, and Trump had really learned his lesson, as though he's a school child from his first term. Let me just give you a quick example of, like, why I can't follow a consistent train of thought from Tulsi Gabbard from a few years ago to now.
Okay.
And this really kind of gets to the core of it. Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know if you recall this. I pointed it out recently because people have the memories of a fruit fly, I find. In 2018, which, I know we're supposed to think of as the Stone Age, but, I have a pretty good memory of it, came out and said that Donald Trump was Saudi Arabia's, quote, bitch. Excuse my language. That was Tulsi Gabbard's own term.
Yep.
And she was accusing Donald Trump of being Saudi Arabia's bitch because Donald Trump was very boastful about how he was forging these extremely extravagant arms deals with Saudi Arabia, facilitating their pulverization of Yemen, which Tulsi Gabbard actually called a, quote, genocide, and accused Trump of being complicit in enabling the genocide. So, like, just as AOC this election cycle said that, although, she thought that she was doing something really powerful and profound by calling the war in Gaza a genocide, she was nonetheless going to support Biden and Harris, who would have to be the chief facilitators of the genocide. And I don't know if AOC ever gave it much thought than that, or like why there might be some tension there. But Tulsi Gabbard did the same thing, in that she, in 2018 and 2019, had accused Donald Trump of being an abettor of the Saudi genocide in Yemen, as she characterized it. And she actually introduced a censure resolution, censure, C-E-N-S-U-R-E, in December of 2019, around the time of the first Trump impeachment, among other things, saying that Trump should be officially indicted or condemned by the Congress, not because of the Ukraine phone call situation, which I agree with her on the substance on that first impeachment. We don't have to get into it, but she was saying that, look, here are some of Trump's actual malfeasance that we should more properly condemn him for as a body. One of which was the fact that Trump, by arming Saudi Arabia so profligately, was facilitating genocide in Yemen. And so now, like, what has Donald Trump said or done to indicate that he has any intent to modify his position on Saudi Arabia? Nothing at all. Trump, if anything, has now even greater financial entanglements with the Saudi royal family. He partners with the Saudi royal family on the LIV Golf League. They host their tournaments at Trump's golf courses. The Saudi State Investment Fund dumps billions of dollars into Jared Kushner's investment fund. And Trump says that he wants to basically come to some sort of security arrangement with Saudi Arabia, akin to the so-called Abraham Accords, which were fake peace deals that he went to like Michigan somehow in Dearborn and convinced the imams, indicated that he wanted like to bring peace to the Middle East. That's another issue that really should have gotten some better coverage over the course of this campaign. But Trump is saying that on a policy level and on a personal level, his entanglement and his support for the so-called genocidal Saudi monarchy, as Tulsi Gabbard once described it, is, if anything, going to intensify. And sure enough, a couple of weeks ago, when Trump showed up to a UFC fight back at Madison Square Garden, he had this like tough guy entourage with him. You know, Elon, Speaker Johnson was there. He was like one of the less tough guys, I guess, that they allowed into the group. Dana White, and, you know, whoever. And Tulsi Gabbard was also there. And you know who had premium seating with Trump, who was also a member of that entourage, like sat next to him, ringside or octagon side or whatever the hell the UFC.
The head of the Saudi PIF fund.
The head of the governor, that's the title, the governor of the Saudi State Investment Fund. Yep. So, like, what I would ask Tulsi Gabbard, if I were still able to talk to her regularly, which I was used to be able to, but no longer, is, okay, like, isn't Trump even more of Saudi Arabia's bitch now? Or am I missing something? So, like, if she was able to jettison one of her core stated convictions with zero explanation, and instead just kind of memory hole everything that was said in the very recent past, and then create these sort of very misleading and distorted depictions of Trump over the course of this campaign, all in service of her own self-advancement, because she's now been nominated to be Director of National Intelligence, then I've lost track of like where I understood her to be several years ago. And by the way, the Office of DNI is sort of a weird bureaucratic invention of the early 2000s. Like, it was created at the direction of George W. Bush in 2004. Its authorities within the intelligence bureaucracy are somewhat murky. It's definitely a powerful position, but it's not really a policy-making role in the same way that, like, the Secretary of State would be, right? You know, the Secretary of State has a huge amount of autonomy because they're running a gigantic department, which has a major policy-making apparatus associated with it. So if people are looking at Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know why they would look at Pete Hegseth and say, oh, this is like our America First constellation. That makes no sense to me. Tulsi Gabbard may be slightly more of an exception because she does have a record of like coming out of advocating policy views that do contravene a lot of consensus. I just don't know like what she actually believes anymore. Like I don't know that like it's able to follow. We're able to follow that with any precision. And in any event, I mean, the DNI, I think, to kind of try to compare that in significance to the Secretary of State, I think is mistaken. I mean, the DNI, even if you read like congressional reports and things on the role of the DNI, everybody acknowledges. This was even in the much maligned Project 2025 document. I mean, they admit, they say that like one of the things that they might want to do some reorganization around is the DNI position because its authorities are very murky. So who knows what she would even be able to do in that position?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to conclude anything other than careerism from my perspective, right? Because you're right, this stuff is unaddressed. It's like, I said this thing, now I'm doing the opposite. I'm going to hop on board with the ascendant political figure. If you're not even bothering to try to square the circle, of course, people are going to default to thinking you don't really care about any of that stuff in particular, and you just want to advance your own career.
Yeah, and maybe you never did.
And another way to think about it is, okay, so there were lots of Republicans in 2016 who claimed that they opposed Trump because they weren't convinced that he would be a reliable conservative. Like Ted Cruz ran against Trump in the 2016 primaries. Yep. And one of the things that he said as to why he was against Trump was that Trump couldn't be relied upon to appoint conservative Supreme Court justices. Well, then Trump gets into power and he does appoint a bunch of Supreme Court justices who are satisfactory to Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz changes his position. I mean, you could criticize Ted Cruz for a lot of things, but like that reasoning at least has some logical coherence to it for why he changed his view on Trump.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
With Tulsi Gabbard, there's no logical coherence to it.
Yep.
Like she was saying that the things Trump actually did when he was in office were the reasons why that she was opposing Trump and wanting to run to defeat him in 2020. So, like, when Trump came out and assassinated Soleimani in January of 2020, I was like out on the campaign trail with her, and she was very assertive and denouncing Trump for it, saying that he had instigated a state of war with Iran. She said that he, quote, didn't know what the hell he was doing with respect to Iran, and that he was betraying his supporters who falsely believed that they were backing Trump on the ground that he was somehow anti-war. And she said that, Trump also was betraying his supporters by constantly filling his administration with people who were, quote, neocons. And she would point to people like Pompeo and Bolton. Well, how is the second term any different in that respect?
Right. Well,
John Bolton actually came out and diverged from his usual routine, which is to be on an anti-Trump crusade. And he, are we still here?
Yeah,
you're here.
Okay, I froze for a second. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
He actually diverged from his anti-Trump crusade and said that he was actually in favor of Mike Waltz becoming National Security Advisor and filling the role that John Bolton played in the first Trump administration.
Wow.
Pompeo, he's ideological.
There's no difference between Pompeo and Rubio, really, substantively. So the thing that Tulsi Gabbard was denouncing Trump for in the first term has not materially changed. What's changed is her ability to ascend to power within the Trump orbit,
right,
which she maneuvered to by, being a Fox News contributor, endorsing a lot of random Republicans, and hoping everybody would forget what she said and did just a few years ago.